U.S. President Donald Trump is under fire again for his handling of the coronavirus outbreak following an explosive new book. In that book, veteran journalist Bob Woodward says Trump deliberately downplayed the dangers posed by the virus in the first weeks of the pandemic. At a news conference, the president defended his handling of the crisis. Trump said he was not lying to the public, but that he did not want to cause a panic. More than 189,000 Americans have died of the virus so far. Well, joining me here in the studio for more is DW reporter and U.S. expert Peter Reledin. Peter, what do you make of Trump's explanation for apparently misleading the American public about the dangers of the coronavirus?
Right. I mean, I think one thing to understand about Trump is that he's a big believer in the power of positive thinking, right? He likes to talk things up rather than play them down, except for apparently in this case. He likes to call himself a cheerleader for the country and said, you know, he wants to project strength and confidence. And I think he said one thing last night that really kind of summed up that ethos that I think he embodies. Let's listen in.
And certainly I'm not going to drive this country or the world into a frenzy. We want to show confidence. We want to show strength. We want to show strength as a nation. And that's what I've done, and we've done very well.
Right. And so, of course, you know, what he actually did by withholding information from the public was in a sense to actually create more panic, because he created a false sense of security. He repeatedly told Americans not to wear masks, even though he very early on knew that the virus was airborne. He said that it was no worse than a flu, even though we have him on tape on February 7th saying that, you know, this virus was 5 times more deadly than the flu. So he created panic because Americans did not understand essentially what they were up against. The economy has been tanking as a result because they didn't know how to respond to the pandemic. And one last thing I will say, I mean, for him to say that he did not want to create panic really just does not square with, you know, his basic campaign message that we've seen in these past couple months, where, you know, panic has very much driven his message. He's, you know, portrayed the unrest that we've seen in connection with the Black Lives Matter protests as the biggest threat to the suburb and the safety of Americans. He's portrayed Biden as a radical socialist, that the fate of the country and the security of the country is at stake here. So those two things don't really add up, I think.
Okay, well, all of this, of course, is happening right in the middle of the U.S. election campaign. And the Democrats have been watching what these revelations that have been coming out of that Bob Woodward book. Let's take a listen in to what Democratic candidate Joe Biden is saying about these latest revelations.
He knew how deadly it was. It was much more deadly than the flu. He knew and purposely played it down. Worse, he lied to the American people. He knowingly and willingly lied about the threat it posed to the country for months. He had the information. He knew how dangerous it was. Now, while this deadly disease ripped through our nation, he failed to do his job on purpose. It was a life and death betrayal of the American people.
So Joe Biden is saying that Trump failed in his duty to protect the American people, even though he knew there was an imminent danger. Right. Could this further damage Trump's re-election prospects, do you think?
Yeah, I think, you know, Biden is not just up by 8 points, you know, in the national average. He is also the one that voters say they trust most to get this pandemic under control. You know, we saw essentially Republicans trying to paper over a little bit the revelations that came out of this, that are coming out of this book, by saying, you know, well, experts really got it wrong as well. And I think what Democrats are going to try to do, and I think that's going to be potentially quite effective, is to say, you know, this is Exhibit A, in their case, to voters, saying that they can't trust Trump, that he only has his own reelection in mind and not the lives of Americans. Trump will do his best to convince voters that he can still be trusted, that he has now gotten the pandemic under control. He will need more voters than just, his base. He will need suburban voters. He will need older voters. And a lot of those people have turned their backs on Trump because of his handling of the pandemic. And so a lot of people, and that's what we saw especially a lot on social media yesterday, saying he has, essentially failed in his most sacred duty as a president, and that is to protect Americans.
Peter, thank you very much. DW's Peter Rolada. Let's take a look at some of the latest developments in the coronavirus pandemic. The global health toll from the coronavirus pandemic has now passed 900,000. The United States remains the world's worst affected country, with deaths, as we mentioned, exceeding 190,000. However, India continues to see a rapid rise in cases. France's COVID hospitalizations have surged to a one-month high of more than 5,000. The disease is spreading at the fastest pace in France since it emerged. Germany's foreign ministry is advising against travel to several cities, including Prague, Geneva, and Dubrovnik, due to local spikes in infections in those cities.